So today we're going to have a special chance to recognize one of the more important policy developments in Montgomery County's history, which is the enactment of a fair housing ordinance. And I'm going to pass the microphone to Mr. Stowe to share some reflections, but I just wanted to say I had a chance to hear from a man, David Skull, who was a council member's son at the time. His father, I believe, could have been his mother, but I believe it was his father, was a council member who helped move this important law through. And he told me about the death threats that he received at home and the incredible outcry and the hostility and the racism that he witnessed for having the courage to join with the Office of the Human Rights Commission, I should say, to enact a significant change in our civil rights law. So, and this law was ahead of the federal policy change. So it was an example of leadership at the county level and at the local level that Montgomery County has a tradition of being ahead of, being a national leader on major consequential policy issues. And the January 1967 initiation of a fair housing law was one of the finest examples. So, Mr. Stowe, I'd like to ask for your thoughts and reflections.
President Riemer and members of council and ladies and gentlemen, we're so very pleased to be here for this very special recognition. And in thinking about it, Council President Riemer, I should say, one of the things that sticks out first and foremost is that it was the women who really pushed this whole movement, and we, the men, had to follow. So I want to make sure I get that out there because it is indeed true, and when you see the history of this. But we're so pleased this morning to have with us persons who have, Council President Riemer and members of council, who in fact were on the front lines of this very important date back in 1967. And I'm so pleased that she was able to be with us this morning, so I'm going to ask her to come first. And there are a couple more folks that you need to hear from, and I hope that our time would allow us to have this opportunity. But to have her come forward and then them in turn to kind of talk briefly about that period of time in this county's history. At one point in time, very tumultuous history. But as it turns out, we are the benefactors of the great work done and the sacrifices made in all of the various battles that were fought. And so I'm very, very pleased then to come before you Esther Delaplane, who is a person to whom I have just gained an enormous amount of respect for, but more importantly, is someone who I look to be and am inspired every day by. And because she drove over here this morning, and she is celebrating, I understand, 94 years young. So Esther, please come.
Well, it was after we got the public accommodations through the county council that we started in the neighborhood of Bannockburn with a good neighbor pledge. You signed a pledge that if your neighbor, a black family moved in next door to you, you would not move away. And so from that was generated the impetus to push then again, as we had pushed for the public accommodations law directed to the county council. It took a while, but again, we beat the feds.
Thank you so much, Esther. At that time, also, one of the fighters in the fight was Tina Clarke. Tina, come share with us, please.
Always have to adjust the mic. Oh, I can remove it. Thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. It's hard to believe that it has been 51 years ago, and I'm so happy this morning to see some of the freedom fighters that were with me on that trip. And I was pleased to see Esther's here, and she drove, and Jackie, and these are the people that I served with. And on the other end, Q Armstrong, and some others I'm afraid I might forget. But just in terms of getting that bill passed, we all served in different capacities on the committee. Some folks serve on the focus groups, collecting data, and just trying to make sure that when the bill was implemented, that we'd be ready to roll it out in Montgomery County. It was a very challenging thing to do. Our lives were at risk. I don't mind sharing that with you. But anything in Montgomery County that we fought for during those days, our lives were at risk. This morning, I want to share with you some new data that came out just recently from NIH. So it talks about where we are in the housing issues. And let's see. So this is an NIH-sponsored program. And the data includes 17 measures of education, housing, equality, income, employment, and poverty. So in this July 2018 document, the data produced a neighborhood atlas map. The map shows where the most elitist people live and the least. So this new map shows the western and eastern portions of Montgomery County, including Albany, Potomac, Bethesda, and Damascus communities, are the least disadvantaged in Montgomery County. The most disadvantaged communities in Montgomery County include neighborhoods in Germantown, Rockville, Glenmount, and Silver Spring. So as a result of this data, it is obvious that there is still much more work to do to ensure housing equality and equity in Montgomery County, and it is imperative that we all stay alert, active, persistent, and undeterred by any obstacles. We must work together to ensure that our children, our aging parents, and our senior citizens have the appropriate housing. And so we want the same thing that we asked for in 51 years ago. We asked for a decent community to live in. We asked for a safe, secured community to live in, and where we can raise our children and our family and live in peace. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed, Tina. Jackie Simon, you got to say at least a quick word or two, please. Jackie Simon, of course, one of the fighters, and we talked about this some time ago. She and I had a conversation. She said to me then that she was just determined that we were going to have fair housing, open housing in Montgomery County. It was not going to stop until that happened. So, Jackie Simon.
Well, maybe I can tell just one anecdote about one of the communities in Potomac. At the time my children were little, there was a community long before that, but my children and I got involved in going to Tobytown with Betty Scull and others, and we would visit. My children would play in the dust and the dirt. There was one outhouse and one pump for 26 families. And police cars came in, not just one, not two, not three. There were 4 of them, 4 men to a car. And they came over to me and said, "What earth are you doing here?" And I said, "I'm visiting with friends and my children have a play date." "Well, it's not safe here." Of course it's safe here. Sadly, I feel that some of these lessons we're having to learn again. And it's my hope that whatever path we follow as individuals, we find the opportunity to walk down that path to equality and justice.
Thank you, Jackie. And, of course, the catalyst that became a benefactor of all this work was a group that was put together called the Commission on Interracial Problems. Interracial Problems was what the actual commission was called in those days. It changed over the years and, of course, into the Human Relations Commission and now the Office of Human Rights. But precursor to all that was the work done by this group on the front lines again as the Human Relations Commission. Volunteers at first with no staff, but came together then around 67 and began to get staff and move forward. And so we're here today also to share from our current Human Rights Commission, our chair, William England.
Thank you, Mr. Stowe. Good morning. Council President Riemer, council members, staff, visitors. As Mr. Stowe indicated, my name is William England, and I am the current chair of the Montgomery County Human Rights Commission. Also, I'd like to acknowledge being with me here today, current commissioners, Dr. Suresh Gupta. We have Commissioner Alejandro Becerra, and Commissioner Janice Freeman, and also from the Office of Human Rights staffer, Ms. Loretta Garcia. I'll be brief, as has already been stated. The predecessor of your current Human Rights Commission at that time, I think, I could be wrong, you ladies can correct me, the Human Relations Commission actually played a large part in drafting the legislation that was submitted to the County Council for an open housing law, and I think it's in July 20th, in fact, 2017, that the County Council did in fact pass the open housing law, and as indicated, ahead of the federal fair housing. Yes. Did I say put it? I'm sorry, 6 to 7. Thank you. All right. And as has been stated here, your Human Rights Commission still has an important role to play in enforcing fair access to housing for all citizens of the county. Just this past April 30th, I think, the commission hosted a symposium and workshop for realtors, housing providers, and for people who were seeking housing opportunities. This is something that we do on a regular basis, and the commission will continue to enforce the county's open housing law. Once again, to Council President Riemer and members of the council, thank you for giving us the opportunity to participate in this observation and honoring the 51st anniversary of the enactment of the Montgomery County open housing law. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. President, members of council, one last thing I want to make sure we do acknowledge up here is we've got also our chair of the Interagency Fair Housing Coordinating Group. And is she motivated just to say a word of hello real quickly? Louise Kaufman heads up housing for the city of Gaithersburg.
I'd like to acknowledge first my good friend, Sidney Katz. He was mayor of the city of Gaithersburg, and I work for the city of Gaithersburg, and my day job is the housing chair. I'm the chair of the Interagency Fair Housing Coordinating Group, and I'm just so honored to be amongst this august group. So thank you.
Thank you, Louise, very, very much. Your indulgence, Mr. President, because NAACP is here. Pat Finn is here to speak on behalf of, and again, you may remember the name of Edith Throckmorton, who was in fact one of those early soldiers on this issue, not only this issue, but all number of kinds of issues, and particularly concerned about the treatment of African Americans in housing. And she referred then to the idea of slumlords being a real, real problem in Montgomery County that she fought so hard to overcome. Pat?
Thank you. On behalf of the NAACP in Montgomery County, its officers and members, some of whom are here today, I'm submitting testimony on behalf of Linda Plummer. Also from the state, NAACP is our Housing Committee Chair, Janice Freeland. On the 51st anniversary of the Fair Housing Act, we join with the county's leadership in recognizing the goal of the law to eliminate discrimination in housing and to praise the county's farsightedness in passing this legislation even before the federal law. We also acknowledge the branch for its early protest of unfair housing practices and the path for equal access to housing opportunities led by the very able voice of spokesperson Edith Throckmorton at the time. We affirm the impact of this law in its broad reach, not only to strengthen businesses and the economy, but to provide, along with education, the very cornerstone of families as the building block of community identity. In carrying out the letter of the law, we bear witness to the spirit of the law too, that gives homeownership a pathway to accessible neighborhoods, quality schools, and meaningful careers that shape and affect our lives. The Montgomery County Human Rights Commission and the Office of Human Rights and other agencies that uphold this civil right and knock down barriers allows for the promise of freedom and opportunity to be fully realized at this time when so much is under assault. We deeply appreciate your continued commitment to fair housing in Montgomery County as a place where diverse, inclusive, and meaningful homeownership can be fully attained, and we, the branch, pledge our continued support and commitment to the same.
Excellent. Thank you, Pat. Mr. President, members of council, we are done. We want to make real sure, though, that we do recognize all these persons. We've got the Interagency Fair Housing Coordinating Group. You all raise your hands. Interagency Fair Housing Coordinating Group. This is a group of folks who are part of Montgomery County government, who try to work every day to ensure then that issues that we're dealing with internal to the government of Montgomery County don't somehow or another have the ill effect of causing barriers for people attaining housing in Montgomery County. And so thank you all for being here from that organization. NAACP is here. Raise your hand again in NAACP. Thank you for being here as well. And the community is here as well. We recognize the community already. And we have the realty community represented here as well, with Q, again, Armstrong, and also Janice Freeman, and also, again, Jackie Simon, all the realtors. And so we're working with all those bodies to make sure that we're working together collectively to make this a better place for everybody concerned. Lastly, to our members of our county council, we have for you a brochure. We have for you also 2 posters. This is part of the recommitment process that we're asking for. We've recognized and honored what has happened in the past. We're asking them for your help in a recommitment to fair housing. These posters that you've been given should be in every lending institution in Montgomery County. So that means your local bank, if they have a mortgage program, they ought to have that poster, not the one just from HUD, but the one from Montgomery County. The law requires that they have that in their place of business. If they're in any part of dealing with the actual transaction of housing matters, they should have that poster in their place of business, in a conspicuous place for the public's interest and opportunity to observe. So we're asking all of our council members to pledge with us that they will take the first turn by posting the poster in their own offices, and that they will go to the various banks that they in fact deal with and ask the question, do you have a poster from Montgomery County about fair housing? And if they do not, to encourage them to get a poster. By the way, we have them available for free. All we got to do is request them. So we're hoping that you will, again, take this recommitment pledge, council members, President Riemer, as we go forward. Lastly, I'm a preacher, so you get 2 lastlies, by the way. And the lastly is this, something that Esther Delaplane told me many years ago in our conversation. She said, when I asked her, you're a white woman, you have all the privileges available to you, why in the world are you concerned about what happens? An initial fight, of course, happened down in Glen Echo Park in the summer of change in 1960. I said, why are you even interested in all of this? And she said to me, it just wasn't right. So in Montgomery County, in the year 2018, it's just not right that anybody cannot live where he or she can afford to live, in a safe community where they can enjoy all the privileges and resources that might be available to them. And so for those reasons, we come today to recommit going forward that in fact that fair housing will be alive and well here in Montgomery County. President Riemer, members of council, thank you so much for your generous opportunity for us to share this morning.
Thank you, Mr. Stowe. It's just so important that you're in the role that you're in and bringing together our housing community and our civil rights community. I'll read the proclamation now. Whereas On January 30th, 1967, the Human Rights Commission voted to submit draft fair housing legislation to the Montgomery County Council. And whereas, after 5 nights of public hearings and demonstrations by supporters, Montgomery County Council passed the open housing law July 20th, 1967, nearly a full year before President Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Federal Fair Housing Act into law April 11th, 1968. And whereas the open housing law prohibited discrimination in the sale or rental of virtually all housing except owner-occupied housing of 2 rented units or less, and whereas the open housing law significantly advanced the civil rights movement by establishing equal opportunity housing for county residents and represented one of the most comprehensive laws in the nation, and whereas the open housing law resulted from the hard work of dedicated residents and county civil rights leaders to address discrimination in housing and work to ensure that all Montgomery County residents have equal access to housing, and whereas the Montgomery County Office of Human Rights enforces the current fair housing law prohibiting discrimination in both residential and commercial real estate on the basis of race, color, religious creed, ancestry, national origin, sex, marital status, physical or mental disability, presence of children, sexual orientation, age, source of income, and gender identity, to ensure that potential renters and buyers are treated inconsistently and fairly to ensure equitable treatment. Now, therefore, do we, Isaiah Leggett as County Executive and Hans Riemer as County Council President, recognize the 51st anniversary of fair housing in Montgomery County and proclaim July 20th of every year as Open Housing Day in Montgomery County. We encourage our residents all to reaffirm their commitment to fair and equal access to housing and unreservedly fight to ensure equal opportunity to all persons for rent, sell, or lease any property in this county now and in the future. Isaiah Leggett and Hans Riemer, Council President. Thank you very much. And we will now request the council to please rise for a photo behind our group in the front. And